The morning sun streamed through the airport terminal windows as a well-dressed man in his mid-40s walked confidently toward his gate. He pulled his carry-on luggage, its wheels clicking softly against the polished floor. His crisp navy suit and polished Oxford shoes reflected his professional status as one of the country's top neurosurgeons, though no one would have guessed it just by looking at him. He had woken up extra early that morning, making sure everything was perfect for his flight to Chicago. There was a young patient waiting for him there, a 12-year-old with a rare brain condition that needed his expertise. He'd spent the previous night reviewing the case files one last time, his dedication to his patients evident in the dark circles under his eyes. As he approached the gate, he double-checked his boarding pass, Seat 2A, first class. He'd earned those frequent flyer miles through countless medical conferences and emergency surgeries across the country. The gate agent smiled warmly as she scanned his boarding pass, and he nodded politely in return. The boarding process started smoothly enough. He waited patiently in the first-class line, briefcase in hand containing vital medical documents. As he stepped onto the plane, the cool air-conditioned breeze welcomed him, a stark contrast to the warmth he felt just moments before. That's when things started to change. A flight attendant with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile glanced at him, then did a double take. Her smile faltered slightly as he moved toward the first-class cabin. He could feel her eyes following him, watching as he located his seat and began storing his carry-on in the overhead compartment. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice carrying a tone he heard far too many times before. "I believe you might be in the wrong cabin. Economy class is further back." He paused, his hand still on his briefcase. Around him, other first-class passengers pretended not to notice, suddenly very interested in their phones or the safety cards in their seat pockets. An elderly couple whispered to each other, stealing glances in his direction. "No," he replied calmly, reaching for his boarding pass. "I'm in the correct seat. 2A." His voice was steady, professional, the same voice he used to reassure nervous patients before surgery. The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line as she looked at his boarding pass. "I'll need to verify this," she said, her tone making it clear she doubted its authenticity. She gestured to another crew member, who approached with an air of authority. As he stood there, waiting for them to confirm what he already knew, he couldn't help but think about the young patient waiting for him in Chicago. The surgery was scheduled for early tomorrow morning, and this kind of delay was the last thing he needed. But he'd been here before, in restaurants, at hotel check-ins, in high-end stores. He knew the drill. What he didn't know was that this particular incident was about to unfold in a way that would surprise everyone on board, including himself. The next few minutes would change not just his day, but the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have predicted. As more passengers boarded the plane, passing by this scene, phones started to emerge. In the age of social media, nothing went undocumented. Little did anyone know, they were about to witness something that would go far beyond a simple boarding dispute, something that would make headlines across the country and spark a conversation about prejudice, professionalism, and the power of dignity in the face of discrimination. The tension in the first-class cabin grew thicker as a second flight attendant joined the scene. She was older, with streaks of gray in her hair and a stern expression that suggested she'd made up her mind before even reaching row 2. The doctor remained standing, his boarding pass still extended, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. "Sir," the senior flight attendant said, emphasizing each word with practiced precision, "we have certain standards in first class that we need to maintain." She gestured vaguely at his attire. The same perfectly tailored suit that had drawn admiring glances at his last medical conference. A young woman 3 rows back had her phone raised, not even trying to be subtle about recording. 2 businessmen exchanged uncomfortable glances, their laptops forgotten in front of them. An older gentleman in a golf shirt shifted in his seat, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The doctor took a deep breath, thinking about all the similar moments in his life that had led to this one. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used in the operating room. "However, I'm a frequent flyer with your airline, and I can assure you that my boarding pass and seat assignment are legitimate." The first flight attendant's face flushed slightly as she double-checked the boarding pass again. Well, she said, her voice taking on an even more condescending tone, perhaps there's been some sort of computer error. We just want to ensure everyone is in their proper place. A quiet murmur rippled through the cabin. More phones appeared, their cameras capturing every moment of the interaction. The doctor noticed a young boy watching wide-eyed from across the aisle, his mother whispering something in his ear. I don't think there's been any error, the doctor replied, maintaining his composure. I've earned these miles through years of travel for my medical practice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some patient files to review before we take off. He gestured to his briefcase, still trying to diffuse the situation professionally. The senior flight attendant's expression hardened. Medical practice, she said, skepticism dripping from every syllable. And what kind of practice would that be? Before he could answer, another passenger spoke up, a woman in her 30s wearing scrubs under her travel jacket. Oh my goodness, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Aren't you the neurosurgeon who's speaking at tomorrow's medical conference? I saw your keynote last year in Boston. The flight attendant's expressions froze. The doctor simply nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. More whispers spread through the cabin, but now they carried a different tone. The young boy across the aisle was tugging at his mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly at the doctor's briefcase with its medical symbol. The first flight attendant's professional smile wavered as she realized her mistake. The senior attendant's face had lost some of its certainty, but she wasn't ready to back down completely. Well, she said, adjusting her uniform jacket, we still need to follow proper verification procedures. Just then, a new voice joined the conversation, one that would turn this uncomfortable situation into something none of them expected. A distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit stood up from the back of first class, his airline executive pin gleaming on his lapel. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted once again, and everyone could sense that this story was about to take an unexpected turn. The doctor remained standing, patient files in hand, knowing that sometimes the best response to prejudice was simply letting events unfold naturally. Little did anyone know, this incident was about to become much bigger than a simple seating dispute. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin crackled with tension when suddenly, a commotion from row 5 caught everyone's attention. A woman in her mid-30s practically jumped from her seat, tears welling up in her eyes. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, quickly swiping through photos while walking toward the front of the cabin. I can't believe it's really you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You're the doctor who saved my daughter's life. She turned her phone around, showing a photo of a smiling young girl in a hospital bed, the doctor standing beside her with that same gentle, reassuring smile he'd worn throughout this entire confrontation. The flight attendants' faces shifted from confusion to dawning realization as the woman continued speaking, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. 6 months ago, every other surgeon told us nothing could be done. They said the tumor was inoperable. She wiped tears from her eyes. But you spent hours studying her case, found a way to remove it completely. She's back in school now, playing soccer again. Other passengers leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed in this unexpected turn of events. The young boy who had been watching earlier now looked at the doctor with wide-eyed wonder, as if a superhero had suddenly appeared on the plane. I remembered your case, the doctor said warmly, his professional demeanor softening. How is she doing with her physical therapy? She's excelling. The therapists can't believe her progress. The woman turned to address the other passengers, her voice growing stronger. This man doesn't just perform surgeries, he gives people their lives back. He spent hours with our family, explaining everything, making sure we understood every step of the process. A businessman in row 3 cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said, raising his hand slightly. Are you the surgeon who pioneered that new technique for spinal cord tumors? I just read about your work in a medical journal. My sister's an oncologist, and she can't stop talking about how it's changing the field. The senior flight attendant's face had turned an interesting shade of red. The younger one was staring at her shoes, her earlier suspicion replaced by visible shame. Around the cabin, passengers who had been pretending not to notice were now openly watching, many still recording on their phones. An elderly woman spoke up next, her voice carrying years of wisdom. You know, she said, looking directly at the flight attendants, I've been flying for over 50 years. and I've seen how things have changed, or how they're supposed to have changed. But moments like this show us we still have a long way to go. The doctor remained composed, though a hint of satisfaction played at the corners of his mouth. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a medical journal, the latest issue of the American Journal of Neurosurgery, with his research featured on the cover. "I understand your need to verify passengers' seating," he said calmly to the flight attendants. "But perhaps next time you might consider that appearances can be deceiving and excellence comes in all forms." The mother who had recognized him was now showing other passengers more photos of her daughter's recovery journey. Small groups of conversation broke out across the cabin, with people sharing similar stories of prejudgment and its consequences. The airline executive who had stood up earlier made his way to the front, his face a mixture of concern and determination. He pulled out his business card, preparing to address not just this situation, but the broader implications it represented. What happened in the next few minutes would transform this incident from a simple case of prejudice into a powerful catalyst for change. As the doctor finally took his seat, pulling out his patient files to review, he knew that sometimes the most effective response to discrimination isn't anger or outrage, but simply letting your work and character speak for themselves. The phones kept recording, capturing every moment of this unfolding story. In the age of social media, what happened next would reach far beyond the confines of this aircraft, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways none of them could have imagined. The airline executive straightened his tie as he made his way through the first-class cabin, his presence commanding immediate attention. The flight attendants' faces dropped as they recognized the distinctive pin on his lapel. He was one of the airline's senior vice presidents, and he did not look pleased. "I've been sitting back there listening to this entire exchange," he said, his voice firm but measured. "And I must say, I'm deeply concerned by what I've witnessed." He turned to the doctor with genuine respect in his eyes. "Sir, I believe you're the head of neurosurgery who sits on the board of City General." The doctor nodded quietly, and the executive continued, now addressing everyone in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this distinguished gentleman not only leads one of the country's top neurosurgery departments, but also oversees the medical care program that treats many of our airline's employees and their families." You could have heard a pin drop in the cabin. The senior flight attendant's clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. The younger one looked like she wanted to disappear into the airplane's carpet. "Just last month," the executive continued, "this doctor performed a life-saving operation on one of our pilot's children. A procedure so complex that only a handful of surgeons in the world could have done it." He turned to the flight attendants, his expression stern. "And yet, here we are, questioning his right to sit in first class." The mother who had recognized the doctor earlier spoke up again. "He spent Christmas Eve operating on my daughter while everyone else was with their families. He didn't have to, but he said every day mattered when it came to brain tumors." More passengers began sharing stories they'd heard about the doctor's work. A college student mentioned how his professor had used the doctor's research papers in their medical ethics class. An older businessman recalled reading about a groundbreaking surgery technique the doctor had developed. The executive pulled out his phone, his face growing more concerned as he scrolled. "Sir," he said to the doctor, "I'm seeing that videos of this incident are already being shared online. They're gaining traction quickly." He showed his screen to the flight attendants, whose faces paled even further. The doctor remained composed, reviewing his patient files as if this was just another day at the office. "I'm more concerned about my patient in Chicago," he said quietly. "A young child is waiting for surgery tomorrow morning." The executive nodded, understanding the doctor's priorities. He turned to the flight attendants, his voice now carrying the weight of authority. "We'll discuss this situation in detail after the flight. For now, I expect this gentleman to receive the highest level of service we can provide." Suddenly, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted as the pilot emerged from the cockpit. He had received word of the commotion and recognized the doctor immediately. "Doctor," he said, extending his hand, "my wife and I can never thank you enough for what you did for our nephew." That tumor would have, his voice caught with emotion. The other passengers watched the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and embarrassment for having initially stayed silent, for being part of a system that allowed such assumptions to persist. The young boy who had been watching everything turned to his mother and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, I want to be just like him when I grow up." The flight attendants, now thoroughly humbled, began their safety demonstration with shaking hands. The executive took his seat, but not before ensuring the doctor had everything he needed for a comfortable flight. As the plane prepared for takeoff, phones continued to buzz with notifications. The incident was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. But the doctor simply adjusted his reading glasses and returned to his patient files. Tomorrow, he would change another life in the operating room. That's what mattered most to him, not the first-class seat, not the viral videos, but the lives he could help save. Little did anyone know, this incident would spark a nationwide conversation about prejudice in everyday situations. But for now, in the confines of this first-class cabin, lessons were already being learned, perspectives were shifting, and the power of quiet dignity in the face of discrimination was being demonstrated in real time. As the plane climbed into the clear blue sky, nobody realized that down below, a social media storm was brewing. The first video, posted by the young woman in row 3, had already reached 50,000 views within minutes. The caption read, "Watch how this incredible doctor handles discrimination with pure class. #respect #dignity." The airline's social media team was caught completely off guard. Their phones started buzzing non-stop with notifications. Comments flooded in from all directions. "This is how you handle ignorance with grace," wrote one viewer. "That doctor just showed everyone what true professionalism looks like," added another. Back on the plane, passengers were sneaking glances at their phones during the brief moments when they had signal. The young college student who had mentioned his medical ethics class was texting his professor, "You won't believe who's on my flight. That neurosurgeon you always talk about." The mother of the young boy who had been watching everything unfold was showing her son the growing social media response. "See," she whispered, "this is what it means to face unfairness with dignity. Sometimes the quietest responses speak the loudest." Meanwhile, in the airline's corporate headquarters, emergency meetings were being called. The video had been picked up by major news outlets, and reporters were already reaching out for comments. The airline's PR team scrambled to draft statements while their social media managers tried to keep up with the thousands of comments pouring in. "Did you see the part where he showed them the medical journal?" One commenter wrote, "Man didn't even raise his voice, just let his achievements do the talking." The comment had already gathered over 10,000 likes. Healthcare workers started sharing their own experiences. "I worked with this doctor during my residency. He's not just brilliant, he's one of the most humble people you'll ever meet." Another wrote, "He operated on my patient last year. Spent hours explaining the procedure to the family. This is exactly who he is." The video sparked a broader conversation. People began sharing similar stories of prejudice they'd faced in their professional lives. A black female judge wrote, "I still get mistaken for the court clerk." This doctor's response is a masterclass in handling these situations. Photos of the doctor's achievements started circulating online, images of him receiving awards, giving keynote speeches, performing groundbreaking surgeries. Each new piece of information made the flight attendants' assumptions look even more misguided. Back in the air, the flight attendants were providing impeccable service, their earlier attitude replaced by genuine remorse. The younger attendant's hands shook slightly as she offered the doctor a fresh cup of coffee. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I never meant to." The doctor looked up from his medical files and gave her a gentle smile. "We all have opportunities to learn and grow," he said quietly. "What matters is what we do with those opportunities." The airline executive, still monitoring the situation on his phone, watched this exchange with approval. He was already drafting emails to corporate leadership about using this incident as a catalyst for change within the company. A trending hashtag had emerged, #DignityWins. People were using it to share their own stories of overcoming prejudice with grace. The original video had now been viewed over 1 million times, with numbers climbing by the minute. Medical students were sharing the video in their study groups. "This is the kind of doctor I want to be," one wrote. "Not just skilled in surgery, but in humanity too." Their comments reflected a deeper understanding that medical excellence wasn't just about technical skill, it was about dignity, respect, and breaking down prejudices. As the plane continued its journey to Chicago, none of the passengers knew that their flight would become a teaching moment for millions. The doctor remained focused on his patient files, unaware that his composed response to discrimination was inspiring people across the country to reflect on their own biases and behaviors. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to reach its peak. What would happen next would transform this incident from a viral moment into something much more meaningful and lasting. Halfway through the flight, the airline's CEO was already in crisis management mode. Sitting in his office, surrounded by anxious executives, he watched the viral video for the fourth time. His face grew more concerned with each viewing. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a wake-up call. "Get him on the phone," the CEO insisted, "before this plane lands." His team scrambled to make it happen, coordinating with the flight crew to establish a connection with the aircraft's satellite phone system. In the first-class cabin, the flight attendant approached the doctor apologetically. "Sir, I have the CEO of the airline on the line for you." Other passengers looked up from their screens, suddenly alert. The viral video had now crossed 5 million views. The doctor paused his medical file review and accepted the phone. "Yes, hello," he said, his voice carrying the same calm dignity it had shown throughout the entire incident. The CEO's voice crackled through the line, full of genuine concern and remorse. "Doctor, I want to personally apologize for what happened today. Your treatment was unacceptable, and it goes against everything our airline stands for." The other passengers tried not to eavesdrop, but in the confined space of the aircraft, snippets of conversation carried. The doctor's responses remained measured and thoughtful. "I appreciate your call," he said, "but more important than an apology is what we do next." Meanwhile, the flight attendants involved in the incident stood near the galley, their faces showing the weight of their actions. The senior attendant had removed her name tag and was turning it over and over in her hands, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks. The younger attendant watched the doctor on the phone, remembering how he had responded to her earlier apology with kindness rather than anger. She pulled out her own phone during her break, finding hundreds of messages from friends who had recognized her in the viral video. The airline executive who had intervened earlier was now drafting a comprehensive email to the board of directors. His fingers moved quickly across his tablet screen as he outlined immediate steps for systematic change within the company. In the CEO's office, team members were already developing a new training program. "We need to address this head-on," one director said, spreading documents across the conference table. "This isn't just about one incident, it's about transforming our entire corporate culture." Back on the plane, the doctor finished his call with the CEO. The businessman sitting next to him couldn't help but ask, "What did they offer you? A lifetime of free flights?" The doctor smiled and shook his head. "I told them I'm not interested in compensation. What I want is change, real, lasting change." They've agreed to work with medical professionals of color to develop new training programs for their staff. Word of the CEO's personal intervention spread through the cabin. The mother who had shared her daughter's surgery story earlier nodded in approval. "That's what leadership looks like," she said to those around her. Accepting responsibility and taking action. The flight attendants received notification of an emergency staff meeting scheduled for the moment they landed. The message mentioned immediate policy changes and mandatory sensitivity training. They exchanged nervous glances, knowing their actions had sparked a company-wide revolution. As the plane began its initial descent into Chicago, the airline's social media team posted their first official response. "We are deeply sorry for the treatment our valued passenger received. We are taking immediate action to ensure this never happens again. #committed to change." The responses flooded in immediately. Some praised the quick response, others demanded more specific action plans. But most notable were the comments from other medical professionals sharing similar experiences, turning the incident into a broader conversation about prejudice in everyday life. The doctor closed his patient files and prepared for landing. Tomorrow, he would perform a life-saving surgery, just as he had done countless times before. But today, without intending to, he had sparked a movement. His dignified response to discrimination would become a case study in professional development programs across the country. As the plane's wheels touched down in Chicago, nobody realized that this was just the beginning. The real changes, The ones that would reshape company policies and challenge deep-seated prejudices were about to unfold. 6 months after that memorable flight, the doctor stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium. He wasn't performing surgery this time. Instead, he was delivering the keynote speech at the National Aviation Service Conference. The audience included flight crews, executives, and staff from every major airline in the country. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures, he began, his voice carrying the same quiet confidence it had shown that day on the plane. Sometimes it comes from small moments that force us to look at ourselves differently. In the front row sat the 2 flight attendants from that fateful day. They weren't there as examples of what not to do, they were there as part of the solution. The senior attendant had become an advocate for change within the airline industry, sharing her story of transformation with new recruits. The easiest thing would have been to file a lawsuit, the doctor continued. But easy doesn't always mean effective. Instead, we chose to turn that moment into a movement. He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics from the airline's new training program. The numbers were impressive. Over 10,000 airline staff had gone through the enhanced cultural sensitivity training. Customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. But more importantly, reported incidents of bias had dropped significantly across the industry. The young boy who had watched everything unfold on the plane was now part of his school's new Respect and Dignity initiative. His mother had shared their story with the school board, leading to changes in how they taught children about prejudice and professional achievement. In the medical community, the impact was equally profound. Hospitals across the country had adopted new protocols for staff interaction, using the incident as a case study in their professional development programs. Medical schools incorporated the story into their ethics courses, teaching future doctors about handling discrimination with grace. The airline had undergone a complete cultural transformation. The CEO had kept his word, working closely with diversity experts to reshape company policies. They didn't just create new rules, they changed the way people thought about respect and dignity in the workplace. The viral video had evolved into something much more meaningful. It was now part of a larger documentary about breaking down prejudices in professional settings. Schools, companies, and organizations used it to spark important conversations about unconscious bias. Social media platforms highlighted the story as an example of positive change. The hashtag #DignityWins had become a movement, with people sharing their own stories of transforming negative experiences into opportunities for growth. Back in the present, at the aviation conference, the doctor shared something he hadn't revealed before. The morning after that flight, he said, "I performed a successful surgery on a young patient. That's what mattered most to me, not the incident, not the viral video, but the lives we can impact when we focus on what truly matters." The audience listened intently as he described how the airline had created a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. The program was named after that flight number, turning a moment of shame into a beacon of hope. The young flight attendant who had first questioned his presence in first class was now leading workshops on conscious inclusion. She shared her perspective. "That day changed me not because I was shamed, but because I was shown a better way." Healthcare professionals in the audience nodded in recognition as the doctor described similar experiences in hospitals and clinics. Change, he emphasized, happens person by person, moment by moment, choice by choice. As his speech concluded, the doctor shared one final thought. "The measure of progress isn't in how we handle big moments," he said. "It's in how we treat each other in those small, everyday interactions that make up our lives." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for his speech. It was for the quiet dignity he had shown that day on the plane. It was for the positive change that one moment had sparked. And most importantly, it was for the reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is to rise above it and show a better way forward. As people filed out of the auditorium, many were already sharing what they'd learned on social media. The story had come full circle, from a viral video to a lasting movement for change. But for the doctor, it was just another day of making a difference, whether in the operating room or in the hearts and minds of people ready to change.